Ladies and gentlemen, and my fellow business associates, we have some special guests here today. And this is a personal note to Mr. Lieutenant General Donald E. Kirkland, Boeing Comprehensive Quality Review Guy. Donald, I looked at your background. I hope you don't mind me calling you Don, my father. And by the way, thank you first off for your service. But my father was also a veteran of the Korean conflict. He was in the United States Air Force. He was a radar operator. This video is about QA authority Daryl Guberman educates Donald Kirkland, recent quality oversight Boeing, FAA regulator. And yes, they were an FAA regulator given that disposition back in 2009. But let me go back and give you a little bit of history on me, because I sent a letter with my bio statement to the Boeing, 6 individuals at Boeing. I don't know whether they received it. I hope they did. But Donald, I need you to know this, because I don't even know if David Calhoun knows it. I hope he doesn't. He's been on their board since 2009, as I said, when they were given dispossession, should I say, given the holy blessing about being an FAA regulator. Boeing is, as of 2009, an FAA regulator. We have the documents. We'll present it to you. I am sorry, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry, Don, about the length of this, because this has been metastasized over 40 plus years. This is no lie. We're going to take this first, give you a little bit of history about the American National Standards Institute, which I think you need to know. ANSI, the American National Standards Institute, is a private, not-for-profit, non-governmental corporation which has been around for over 100 plus years. It has both federal agencies and corporations on board. In 2019, Donald, I exposed an impropriety in laboratory accreditation. A2LA, an accreditor of laboratory, which a government many times uses. I said that they sit as a member on ANSI's board. And this is the actual document I showed. They also, between 2015 and 21, they were sitting on ANSI's, on the IAF, which is the International Accreditation Form. Donald, as you know, being a serviceman, they come out with all these freaking acronyms. You can't know your head from your tail if you need a dictionary. The IAF is the International Accreditation Form, which is a repository for both national and international accreditation bodies. Any accreditation body that sits on the IAF is considered equivalent to ANSI ANAB. The American National Standards Institute and the American National Crediting Board combined forces, and ANSI took over complete control over ANAB in 2018. They are also, and I will show you, they're underwriters for those accreditation bodies that sit on the IAF. So we look deeper. An employee from A2LA got on here and said that A2LA and ANSI are separate accreditation bodies unto themselves. I did a video again showing without a doubt that A2LA sits on there. And what happened is a gentleman who I didn't know, who is the chairman of the American National Standards Institute, Mr. Russ Cheney, happened to call me up. And this is the voice message that he left, Donald. And you tell me, and by the way, when he said this, because he is the chairman, he sets the tone for all the board members. So what he says is a reflection of the board members, and Boeing happens to be one of them. So let you listen.
Cheney, please leave a message and I'll return your call as soon as possible. Record your... This is Russ Cheney. Please leave a message and I'll return your call as soon as possible. Record your...
Now what I did after receiving that, Donald, is I sent a letter to Joe Bathia. Joe Bathia sent it to their attorney, where the attorney said, after analysis, we were unable to identify any harassing or objectionable content. in the brief audio file. And they let it die like that. You heard it. It said half a nut, fuck you. Now, is that what Mr. Calhoun, being a representative on ANSI's board, he is now saying that to me via Russ Cheney. Joe Battia, by the way, is the CEO for ANSI, okay? And he sent it off to his attorney. I looked further into laboratory accreditation because I want to show you this as well. A Miss Pamela Sale stated under deposition in 2017-18, right around there in Texas. She said, and she basically confessed to the release of the virus from the Wuhan, China lab. You will see the gentleman here who took over the IAF. You will see that he's standing in the lab in Wuhan issuing a laboratory accreditation. I tell you this because I'm going to build this up like a fine science fiction to Boeing's issues. Pamela Sale said under deposition, she said, and I'm going to change it to phlebotomy lab and biolevel 4 lab and world. One of the issues is that there is no commonly agreed upon set of standards that forensic labs around the country have to follow. Instead, there are informal guidelines that labs can choose to follow or not. Why in good God's conscience are they giving a laboratory certificate? The whole thing about AS9100, the whole thing about all the ISO standards, they're supposed to be uniform throughout the industry. You're supposed to take that and go from one company to another, and they have basically set of procedures in place. What she's telling me there, and she's telling you, is that laboratory accreditation that they hand the certificates to is a fraud. Now we continue on. In 2015, a Randy Doty, who was the vice president of the American National Crediting Board, and also the chairman on the IF, the International Accreditation Forum, which I told you about as a repository for accreditation bodies, national and international, incorporated in Delaware, handed the leadership of the IF to this communist Chinese national Zhao Jinwu, who's been involved with our quality since 1994, for 30 years. He was made chairman of the IAF. He was also at the time the chief executive of the China National Accreditation Services in Beijing, China. Do you feel anything about this? You'll find out that your organization, the Department of Defense, that you were part of the military, was being watched over by Communist China. So anyway, in 2017 though, while this guy was on the IAF, Randy was being advertised as a private concern of the Department of Homeland Security. A Mr. Phil Matheson, who sits on ANSI's board, getting financially compensated at that time as a royalty payment, okay, which means it's like non-taxable of $262,000 plus his federal salary. But that isn't the problem. The problem is you have this communist national, Zhao Jinwu, who is mandated by his country of origin, Communist China, to take our data through the China National Intelligence Law, Article number 7. And here, if you didn't believe me, here he is standing in the laboratory in Wuhan, China, issuing a laboratory certification while he's the chairman of the IEF, and he's representing here the China National Accreditation Services, which means if the virus escaped, then ANSI ANAP, because they're underwriters, they are legally responsible. And here is Xi Jinping, actually right over there, China National Intelligence Law, Article number 7. You have ANAP that sits on ANSI's board. You have the factor that ANSI took over complete control over ANAP. And by the way, they also sat at the time when the China National guy was taking it over, Xi Jinping, between 2015 and 21. You have them sitting on the International Accreditation Forum incorporated in Delaware. What makes it worse, okay, if I may say that, is that you have Iran and Pakistan, who are equivalent in accreditation to ANAP, sitting there right over by ANAP. And the thing about it is, I'm not saying this about the people, the populations of these two countries, but one country harbored Osama bin Laden, and Iran wants to see the destruction of the United States of America, and they're also financing Hamas. So what can we say about ANSI ANAP? Do they approve and condone Hamas? They must, because they sit on the same organization. They also have 10 different registrars in China. They do, Donald, that can issue an ANAP accredited certification. They took this down, but on this website it states that ANSI are are underwriters for the IAF. And here's what an underwriter is. As you know, an underwriter is any party that evaluates and assumes another party's risk for a fee. So ANSI's big thing was we only certify the system before they were an underwriter. Once they became an underwriter, Don, they accept full responsibility for that door blowing off the ship. And if you want to be, you're a government guy, here is the actual one of the many we have, a government contract. Here's the number, you can look it up. And it states here, Donald, right in the highlighted area, ANSI is an underwriter for the International Accreditation Form. At the time this standard operating work order was issued by our government, the IAF is mentioned on here. And who was it being controlled by? Communist China. Sitting on ANSI's board is also 7 different registrars. One of the registrars, Intertech, is used by Spirit Aero Systems, as you know. I hope you know it. Also, you have BSI registrars on board as well, and 7 registrars that sit right over by the accreditation body that they use. And here they are. And here's the accreditation body that they put their logo on. Now we get to the brass tacks. But before we do this, let's move up to 2022, if we may. In 2022, I placed in for nomination, Director at Large, to ANSI, this booklet. It had 16, and if you want, Donald, I will basically send it to you as verification of my integrity, honesty, and the truth. But we sent this in because we thought that we could cure their ills from the have-a-nut fuck you that Russ Cheney had left me unprofessionally. Well, we put this in with 16 letters of recommendation. I was given the task to, what can Daryl Guberman do for ANSI and ANAP if he was a board member? I had to answer 9 questions. The only problem is, Don, if I may say, if you look at the bottom, I apologize. If you look at the bottom, who is the nominating chairman 3 years later? No other than Russ Cheney. And let me just play you his audio file again so you get the full spectrum of what he said.
This is Russ Cheney. Please leave a message and I'll return your call as soon as possible. Recorded.
That's exactly what he said. Now we get on to Boeing, the people who you're representing for the 737 in quality. Boeing. In their supplier portal, or may I say on their supplier portal, is no other than ANSI ANAP, or international equivalent. So the internationally equivalent, Don, could be Iran and Pakistan because they are equivalent in accreditation to ANSI ANAP. So here on their supplier portal, they're telling you internationally equivalent and must be ANSI ANAP. The problem too is that their quality started out trashy way before you came on board. They were caught fudging documentation along with their supplier, Kobe Steel. Most recently in their composite facility, and my background is composites, plastics, they got caught, again, not writing down proper times and temperatures, etc. And that's a problem when it comes to composites, because with composites, as you know, it's fabric. It's resin-impregnated fabric laid on top of each other, and under a certain temperature and pressure, it becomes a solid mass, a solid one-unit type structure. If you have interstitial bubbles because it was not properly under pressure and not properly heated, you're going to have vibratory stresses, and that will cause the fabric to separate and disbond. And that's most recently, and by the way, that was from 2007 to 2018. On a Boeing Bulletin, Donald, here it is. If you look at the yellow, it says on-site, and the survey I'm going to put audit in because that's what it is. On-site Boeing audits of suppliers' quality system if need be. Our preference is to deal with proven suppliers with excellent quality performance and not have to do on-site quality system surveys. So Donald, let me just educate you just slightly. This is what it means. If you are AS9100, which is the certification, International Standards Organization, or International Organization of Standards, is an ISO standard for aerospace. What that means is this. You hand Boeing your certificate, 2002, and then you can ship in parts, and Boeing does not have to send in any type of source inspectors to inspect the viability of their suppliers. Boeing also, as I said, sits on ANSI's board right over by, guess what? Right over by, and here we go, the FAA, who signed off FAA authority to Boeing in 2009. And here it is. You can't make this up. The first sentence illuminates everything. The FAA increased the authority of Boeing's commercial airplanes division to self-certify its own aircraft. Okay? It wasn't officially to switch over to August 31st, 2009. Boeing employs to perform tasks on behalf of the FAA that include oversight of testing and product standards, along with certification of aircraft technologies and new aircraft designs. Which means you have Boeing being FAA, and you have the FAA, regulatory. How in good conscience could David Calhoun say on being interviewed that our regulator, the FAA, and I'm going to play that for you because you need to know this. I am good at what I do, into research, into quality, and here's David Calhoun's own words.
But I will say this, the work that our regulator, in this case the FAA, has been doing to inspect the situation and create a procedure and a protocol for the airlines to go out and inspect each and every one of the airplanes, 100% of them, and make certain that the work that our regulator, in this case the FAA, has been doing to inspect the situation and create a procedure and a protocol for the airlines to go out and inspect.
You don't need to hear that. The work of our regulator. They're not the regulator. Boeing is a regulator and the FAA is a regulator. Now you're in a conundrum, a pickle. On top of that, it saddens me to show you this because you're a military guy. Between 2015 and 21, the DoD sat on, and they still sit, on ANSI's board, being watched over by communist China, being very close by their allegiance to membership to ANSI ANAP. You saw it. They're right over by Iran. So I'm going to ask you, from one human being, one proud American, to another. How could the DoD, through ANSI, sit over by a country like Iran who supports Hamas? Does that mean that Mr. Calhoun and the board supports Hamas and every one of those directors at large who sit there? Because that's exactly what it's telling me here. So what I'd like to do is I would really like to bring this video to a close. I think I've told you a lot of information. I will give you a little bit of background on me personally, education-wise. I have a BS degree in management. I have 10 certificate programs that ended up to be 5 technical diplomas from the Materials Engineering Institute in Meadow Parks, Ohio, a great institution. They are aluminum and its alloys, corrosion, composites, the basics, composites, material and selection, principles of metallography, titanium and its alloys, principles of failure analysis, fundamentals of non-destructive testing, welding inspection, quality control, and mechanical testing of metals. These coalesced into 5 technical diplomas, Donald. Composite engineering technology, non-ferrous metallurgy, testing and inspection, welding metallurgy, and applied general metallurgy. I do this, Donald, because I don't think David will tell you or allude to you the incestuous relationship that they have with ANSI ANAB, their accreditor, that they sit on the board, they push them in their supplier portal. Is there any oversight? No. They allowed an ANAB certified company, ANSI ANAB certified company, just hand in the certificate, hand in the part for over 22 years. My telephone number is 203-556-1493 or Daryl, Daryl, TQRS at yahoo.com. Donald, I will say this. If you're an intelligent man, you will contact me. If not, shame on you. Thank you.